The stagecoach lurched violently over the rutted trail, sending Delilah Winters crashing against the wooden frame hard enough to leave bruises. And in that heart-stopping moment when the wheels splintered and the whole world tilted sideways, she realized that all the grand opera houses in San Francisco meant nothing if she died in the middle of nowhere with dust filling her lungs. The year was 1882, and Delilah had been traveling for 3 weeks from New York City, making her way through a circuit of Western towns that hungered for culture and refinement in the untamed territories. She had performed in Denver, in Salt Lake City, and now she was heading to Walla Walla, Washington Territory, where a newly built theater awaited her arrival. The impresario had promised her a sold-out house, miners flush with gold who would pay handsomely to hear an Italian aria sung by a genuine, trained soprano from the East. But none of that mattered now as the stagecoach tumbled down the embankment, throwing her against the ceiling, then the floor, then against poor Mrs. Henderson, who had been her traveling companion for the last leg of the journey. The sound was deafening, wood cracking and splitting, horses screaming in terror, the driver shouting something unintelligible before his voice cut off abruptly. Delilah felt something strike her head and the world went white, then gray, then blessedly dark. When consciousness returned, it came with pain. Her head throbbed where a gash had opened above her left temple, and her ribs ached with every shallow breath. Dust filled her mouth and nose, making her cough, which only intensified the pain radiating through her chest. The stagecoach lay on its side, one wall now the floor beneath her, the other wall now a ceiling above. Afternoon sunlight streamed through the broken door, illuminating particles of dust that danced in the still air. "Mrs. Henderson," Delilah's voice came out as a croak. She turned her head, ignoring the spike of agony, and saw the older woman crumpled in the corner, eyes closed, a trickle of blood running from her ear. "Mrs. Henderson, please wake up," but the woman did not stir. Delilah tried to move toward her, but something heavy pinned her legs. A trunk, she realized, the one containing her costumes and sheet music. She pushed at it, but it would not budge. Outside, she could hear nothing but an eerie silence. No voices, no movement, just the whisper of wind across the ravine. Fear clawed at her throat. They had been traveling through desolate country for hours, nothing but sagebrush and rocky hills in every direction. The driver had said they would not reach the next way station until evening, if no one came looking for them, if no one happened to pass by. She called out, "Help! Someone help us!" Her voice sounded thin and desperate even to her own ears, swallowed up by the vast emptiness of the landscape. Time passed with agonizing slowness. Delilah tried again and again to free her legs, but the trunk was too heavy and wedged at an angle that gave her no leverage. Mrs. Henderson remained unconscious, her breathing shallow and irregular. The sun shifted lower in the sky, and shadows lengthened inside the wrecked coach. Delilah's throat grew parched, and she remembered with dismay that the water canteen had been tied to the outside of the coach, probably lost in the tumble down the ravine. She was beginning to despair when she heard it, faint at first but growing steadily louder. Hoofbeats. A horse approaching at a canter. Relief flooded through her so intensely that tears sprang to her eyes. "Help!" she screamed, putting every ounce of her trained voice into the call. "We are down here, help us!" The hoofbeats stopped. Then came the sound of boots on gravel, someone descending the slope carefully. A shadow fell across the broken door, and then a man appeared, backlit by the late afternoon sun so that she could not make out his features at first. "Lord have mercy," he said, his voice a deep drawl that spoke of Southern origins. "Hold on, miss. I will get you out of there." He climbed into the wrecked coach with careful movements, his boots finding purchase on what had been the side wall. As he moved into the dimmer interior, Delilah could finally see him properly. He was tall, perhaps in his late 20s, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly where it brushed his collar. He wore dusty work clothes, a worn leather vest over a blue shirt, and a gun belt slung low on his hips. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, a startling light brown that seemed almost golden in the filtered sunlight, full of concern and determination. "Are you hurt badly?" he asked, kneeling beside her. His hands moved over the trunk, pinning her legs, testing its weight. "My head and my ribs, I think. But Mrs. Henderson, she has not moved since the crash. Please, you must help her first." He glanced at the older woman, and Delilah saw something flicker in his expression. Gently, he reached out and pressed 2 fingers to the side of Mrs. Henderson's neck. He stayed that way for a long moment, then withdrew his hand and shook his head slowly. "I am sorry, miss. She is gone." The words hit Delilah like a physical blow. "No, no, she cannot be. She was just talking to me before the crash, telling me about her daughter in Portland. She cannot be gone. I am truly sorry." His voice was gentle but firm. "But right now, I need to get you out of here before this coach shifts anymore. Can you tell me your name, Delilah? Delilah Winters." She realized tears were streaming down her face, cutting tracks through the dust that coated her skin. "I am Thomas Hartley. Most people call me Tom. I am going to lift this trunk now, and when I do, I need you to pull your legs free." "Can you do that?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. He positioned himself, braced his legs, and lifted. Muscles strained against the fabric of his shirt, and his jaw clenched with effort, but the trunk rose slowly. Delilah pulled her legs toward herself, biting back a cry as pain shot through her left ankle. As soon as she was clear, he lowered the trunk carefully and immediately turned his attention back to her. "Let me see that ankle." His hands were surprisingly gentle as he ran them over her boot, checking for broken bones. She winced when he touched the outside of her foot. "Likely just a bad sprain, but we should wrap it. First, let us get you out of here and up to level ground." He helped her stand, taking most of her weight as she balanced on her good foot. Together, they maneuvered through the broken door, and then he simply lifted her in his arms and carried her up the steep slope. Despite her pain and grief, Delilah found herself acutely aware of the strength in his arms, the steady beating of his heart where her shoulder pressed against his chest. At the top of the ravine, she saw his horse, a sturdy bay gelding with intelligent eyes, and beyond that, the road stretching in both directions through the rolling hills. The wrecked stagecoach looked even worse from above. One wheel completely gone, the whole thing canted at a sickening angle. She could see the driver now, lying motionless on the rocks below, his neck bent at an unnatural angle. Both horses that had pulled the coach were down as well, one clearly dead, the other thrashing weakly with what looked like a broken leg. Thomas set her down carefully in the shade of a large boulder and retrieved a canteen from his saddle. "Drink slowly," he cautioned as he handed it to her. The water was warm but tasted like salvation. She forced herself to take small sips as he had instructed, even though she wanted to gulp it down. While she drank, he went to his saddlebags and returned with clean cloth for bandages and a small flask. "This is going to hurt," he warned before pouring whiskey over the gash on her head. He was right. She gasped and gripped his arm hard enough to leave marks through his sleeve, but he worked quickly, cleaning the wound and then binding it with strips of cloth. Next, he removed her boot, which required cutting the laces because her ankle had swollen, and wrapped it firmly. "What were you doing out here?" she asked, partly to distract herself from the pain. "This seems like a very remote stretch of road." I have a ranch about 5 miles north of here. I was checking on some strays that wandered toward the ravine country when I heard the crash." He finished tying off the bandage and sat back on his heels. "You are lucky I was close by. This road does not see much traffic except for the scheduled stage runs." "Lucky," she repeated, the word tasting bitter. Mrs. Henderson would not agree. His expression softened. "No, I suppose not." "Do you have family who should be notified?" She mentioned a daughter in Portland. "I only met her when we both boarded in Pendleton 3 days ago." Delilah looked away toward the empty horizon. "I am traveling alone, performing in theaters throughout the territories. I was supposed to arrive in Walla Walla tomorrow." "You are a performer, an opera singer." Something shifted in his expression, interest mixing with surprise. "I heard there was an opera singer coming to town. The newspaper has been running advertisements for weeks. Everyone is talking about it." Despite everything, Delilah felt a small surge of professional pride. "I hope the theater manager will understand about the delay. All of my costumes and music were in that trunk. We can retrieve them, but not tonight. The sun will be down in an hour, and that ravine is treacherous in the dark." He glanced toward the road, calculating. "My ranch is closer than Walla Walla, and you are in no condition for a long ride. I can take you there, get you properly cleaned up and rested, and then bring you into town tomorrow." Propriety dictated that she should refuse, that traveling alone with a strange man to his isolated ranch was entirely inappropriate for a woman of her station. But the alternative was spending the night here beside the wreckage with 2 dead bodies, or attempting a painful journey into town in the gathering darkness. And something in Thomas Hartley's steady gaze made her trust him. "Thank you," she said simply. "I would be very grateful." He nodded and went to deal with the injured horse, drawing his pistol. She turned away before he fired, but the sound still made her flinch. One more death on a day already stained with tragedy. When he returned, his face was grim. "Can you ride if I hold you?" he asked. "The bay is steady, he will not spook." "I think so." He lifted her onto the horse, then swung up behind her, his arm coming around her waist to steady her. She leaned back against him, too exhausted and hurting to maintain a proper distance. As they rode north, leaving the wrecked stagecoach behind, the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple. The land here was beautiful in a stark way, all rolling hills covered in bunch grass and sagebrush, with distant mountains rising like purple shadows on the horizon. "How long have you lived here?" she asked, needing conversation to keep from thinking about Mrs. Henderson, about how close she had come to sharing that fate. "Almost 4 years now. I came west after the war, spent some time cowboying in Texas and Montana, then saved enough to buy land of my own." His voice rumbled against her back as he spoke. "It is not a big spread, just enough cattle to make a living, and I run a few horses too. I do breaking and training for other ranchers." "You live alone?" "I have 2 hands who work for me, Pete and Charlie. They are good men, brothers from California. They have a cabin on the far side of the property." He paused. "I know what you are thinking, that it is not proper for you to stay at my place, but I promise you, Miss Winters, you will be safe. I will sleep in the barn, and you can bar the door if it makes you feel better." "I believe you," she said, and realized she meant it. "And please call me Delilah." "Delilah," he repeated, and her name sounded different in his drawl, drawn out and somehow more musical. "That is a beautiful name." "Biblical. My mother loved the story, though I always thought it was strange to name a daughter after a temptress who betrayed Samson." She felt him chuckle, a pleasant rumbling sensation. Maybe she just liked the name. Perhaps. "She died when I was 12, so I never got to ask her." "I am sorry. That must have been hard." "It was. My father did his best, but he did not know what to do with a daughter. He sent me to live with my aunt in Philadelphia, and she arranged for my voice training. The memories felt distant now, like someone else's life. What about your family? My mother and sisters are back in Tennessee. My father died at Shiloh. He said it matter-of-factly, but she heard the old pain beneath the words. The war took so much from so many people. Yes, it did. They rode in companionable silence after that, the rhythmic movement of the horse beneath them almost soothing despite Delilah's aches and pains. As twilight deepened into true darkness, lights appeared ahead, two small structures visible against the darkening hills. "Home," Thomas said, and she heard satisfaction in his voice. The ranch house was modest but well-built, constructed of logs with a covered porch across the front. Smoke rose from the chimney, and as they approached, the door opened. A lanky man with graying hair stepped out, rifle in hand, then lowered it when he recognized Thomas. "Boss, we did not expect you back until tomorrow." "Change of plans, Pete. There was a stagecoach accident down in the ravines. This is Miss Delilah Winters. She needs a place to rest and recover." Pete's weathered face creased with concern. "Others hurt, 2 dead. The driver and an older woman passenger. I will need you and Charlie to ride down there at first light with the wagon to bring back the bodies. The sheriff will need to be notified. Consider it done." Pete's gaze shifted to Delilah, kind but curious. "Miss, we will do everything we can to make you comfortable." Thomas dismounted and carefully lifted Delilah down. Her ankle throbbed the moment weight touched it, and she swayed. He caught her easily and simply carried her again, mounting the porch steps and pushing through the door. The interior of the house was neat and spare, furnished with handmade furniture that showed skill if not sophistication. A fire burned in the stone fireplace, and a pot of something that smelled like venison stew hung over the flames. Thomas set her down in a chair near the fire, then moved to light several oil lamps. "I know it is not fancy," he said, a hint of apology in his tone. "It is warm and safe, and that is all that matters right now." Delilah looked around, taking in the details. Books lined a shelf near the window, more than she would have expected. A guitar hung on the wall. "Do you play?" "Some. Taught myself mostly." He went to a cupboard and retrieved a bottle and 2 glasses. "Whiskey, for the pain, please." He poured for both of them and sat down in the chair opposite hers. In the lamplight, she could see him more clearly than she had before. He had a strong face, all clean lines and angles, with a straight nose and a firm jaw. There was a scar above his right eyebrow, a thin white line that disappeared into his hairline. His hands, wrapped around his glass, were calloused and strong, the hands of a man who worked hard for his living. "You must think I am terribly vain," she said suddenly, "to be worried about my costumes and music when 2 people are dead. I think you are in shock, and your mind is latching onto things you can control." He took a sip of his drink. "Grief will come later in its own time." His understanding surprised her. "You sound like you speak from experience." "The war taught me more than I wanted to know about death and grief." He stared into the fire for a moment. A man can only see so many friends die before he learns that surviving requires a kind of practical distance. "You mourn, but you also keep moving forward. Is that what you did? Kept moving forward, eventually. Took some time and some hard lessons." He stood and went to tend the stew, stirring it with a wooden spoon. "You must be hungry. When did you last eat?" "Breakfast, I think." "It seems like days ago now." He ladled stew into bowls and brought her one with a hunk of bread. It was simple food, but Delilah ate ravenously, surprised by her own hunger. Thomas ate as well, and they shared the meal in comfortable silence. Afterward, he showed her to his bedroom, the only private room in the small house. "I changed the sheets 2 days ago," he said. "There is a basin and pitcher for washing, and I will leave you one of my clean shirts to sleep in. I cannot take your room. You can and you will. I have slept in the barn plenty of times, usually when we are birthing calves. It is no hardship." He paused in the doorway. "If you need anything, anything at all, Pete and Charlie are just across the yard. Do not hesitate to call out. Thomas." She stopped him before he could leave. "Thank you for everything. You saved my life today." He looked uncomfortable with the gratitude. "Any decent person would have done the same, perhaps, but you are the one who was there." She met his eyes steadily. "I will not forget it." After he left, Delilah washed as best she could with the cold water in the pitcher, carefully sponging the dust and dried blood from her skin. The face that looked back at her from the small mirror above the dresser was hardly recognizable. Her dark hair hung in tangles, her face was bruised and scraped, and the bandage on her head gave her a lopsided appearance. She looked nothing like the polished performer who had stepped onto stages in New York and Boston. She slipped into Thomas's shirt, which hung to her knees, and climbed into his bed. The sheets smelled of sun and soap and something else, something masculine that she realized must be his own scent. Despite everything that had happened, despite her pain and the shock and grief churning inside her, she felt safe here in this small room in a stranger's house far from anywhere. Sleep claimed her quickly, but it was not peaceful. She dreamed of the stagecoach tumbling endlessly down the ravine, of Mrs. Henderson's still face, of calling out for help that never came. She woke multiple times, disoriented and frightened, before remembering where she was. Each time, she heard the soft sounds of the ranch at night, an owl calling, cattle lowing in the distance, and once, the low murmur of male voices from the direction of the barn. The sound soothed her back to sleep. Morning came with golden sunlight streaming through the single window. Delilah woke to find her body stiff and sore, every movement a reminder of yesterday's accident. She dressed in her torn and dusty traveling clothes, wincing as she pulled the fabric over her bruised ribs and bandaged head. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found Thomas at the stove, cooking eggs and bacon. "Good morning," he said, glancing over his shoulder. "How are you feeling?" "Like I tumbled down a ravine in a stagecoach," she admitted, "but alive, which is more than I had any right to expect." Pete and Charlie left at dawn to deal with the wreckage. They should be back by midday. He slid eggs onto a plate and brought it to the table. "After breakfast, I will take you into town. The doctor should look at your injuries, and I imagine the sheriff will want to ask you some questions about the accident." They ate together, and Delilah found herself watching him, curious about this man who had appeared in her moment of greatest need. He moved with an easy confidence, economical in his gestures, clearly comfortable in his own space. When he caught her looking, he raised an eyebrow questioningly. "I was just thinking that I know very little about you," she said. "You know why I am here, where I am from, what I do. But you are still something of a mystery. Not much mystery to me. I am just a cattleman trying to make a living. Somehow I doubt that. Just a cattleman who reads." She nodded toward the bookshelf. "I saw volumes of Shakespeare there and Whitman and Homer." He looked slightly embarrassed. "My mother was a teacher before she married. She made sure all her children could read and appreciate literature. I suppose the habit stuck." "Do you have siblings?" "3 sisters. Sarah is the oldest. She married a banker in Knoxville. Then Rebecca and Mary, both still unmarried and living with my mother." A fond smile crossed his face. "They write me letters full of gossip and complaints about small-town life. They think I am living a grand adventure out here." "And are you?" He considered the question seriously. "I think adventure is probably the wrong word. It is a hard life, uncertain, but it is mine, built by my own hands. That means something." She understood that. Her singing career was the same, built note by note, performance by performance, against the expectations that she would simply marry well and settle into domestic life. "Freedom," she said. "That is what you are describing." "Yes." He looked at her with new appreciation. "Exactly that." After breakfast, he helped her outside where his horse waited, already saddled. The ride into Walla Walla took nearly 2 hours, following a road that wound through increasingly settled country. They passed other ranches, fields of wheat beginning to green up with spring growth, and occasional travelers who waved or called out greetings to Thomas. Walla Walla itself was larger than Delilah had expected, a thriving town of several thousand people with wide streets and substantial buildings. Thomas took her first to the doctor, a brisk, efficient man named Dr. Morrison, who examined her injuries and declared that she had been very lucky. "The head wound is superficial, though you will have a scar," he said, applying fresh bandages. "The ribs are bruised but not broken, and the ankle is indeed just a sprain. Rest for a few days and you should recover fully." "I have performances scheduled," Delilah protested, "starting in 3 days." Dr. Morrison raised his eyebrows. "Ah, you are the opera singer. Well, you can sing from a chair if necessary, but I would not recommend anything too physical for at least a week." From the doctor's office, Thomas took her to see the sheriff, a portly man with shrewd eyes who listened carefully to her account of the accident. He asked detailed questions about the condition of the road, the speed they had been traveling, anything unusual she had noticed before the crash. "Sounds like the wheel just gave out," he concluded. "The stage line has been running those coaches hard. I will send a report to the company, but I doubt anything will come of it." He turned to Thomas. "You say Pete and Charlie are bringing in the bodies, should arrive this afternoon. Good. I will notify Mrs. Henderson's daughter and arrange for transport of the body to Portland." He made a note in a ledger. "Miss Winters, you are free to go. If I have any further questions, I will contact you through the theater." The theater. Delilah had almost forgotten. "I should go there now. Let them know I am all right. They will be worried when the stage does not arrive." Thomas escorted her to the Walla Walla Opera House, an impressive brick building that stood on the corner of Main Street and 2nd Avenue. Inside, they found controlled chaos. Workers rushed about adjusting curtains, testing lights, arranging chairs. A harried-looking man in a suit spotted them and hurried over. "Can I help you? We are preparing for a very important performance, so if you are looking for tickets—" "Mr. Blackwell," Delilah interrupted. "I am Delilah Winters." The man's face went through a remarkable series of expressions: confusion, recognition, shock, and relief. "Miss Winters, thank God. The stage was due yesterday evening, and when it did not arrive, we feared the worst. Are you all right? What happened?" She explained again about the accident, the deaths, her rescue. Mr. Blackwell listened with growing distress, occasionally pressing a handkerchief to his forehead. "Terrible, simply terrible, but you are here now, that is what matters." He looked her over, taking in her disheveled appearance and bandages. "Can you perform? We have sold every ticket for the next 3 nights. My voice is fine," she assured him, "though the doctor says I should not move around too much for a few days. We can work with that. Stationary performances, perhaps on a chair as you suggested. And your costumes?" "In the wrecked stagecoach. Mr. Hartley's men are retrieving everything this afternoon." Mr. Blackwell turned his attention to Thomas for the first time, really seeing him. "Mr. Hartley, we are deeply in your debt. If there is anything we can do, no need," Thomas said quietly. "I am just glad I was there to help. Nevertheless, please accept tickets to all of Miss Winters's performances with our compliments." After assuring Mr. Blackwell that she would return the following day to begin rehearsals, Delilah allowed Thomas to lead her to the hotel where rooms had been reserved for her. The proprietor fussed over her like a mother hen, showing her to a spacious suite on the second floor overlooking the street. Finally alone with Thomas in the hotel corridor, Delilah felt suddenly awkward. Over the past day, they had shared circumstances of extreme intimacy born of crisis. Now, returning to the normal world with its proprieties and expectations, she was not sure what to say. "I suppose this is where we part ways," she said. "You have a ranch to run and I have performances to prepare for." "I suppose so." He shifted his weight, looking equally uncertain. "Though I should return this afternoon with your trunk, once Pete and Charlie bring it back." "Of course. And I should pay you for your trouble, for the doctor, for everything." "No," his voice was firm. "I do not want your money, Delilah." She looked up at him, at his serious face and those remarkable amber eyes. "Then what do you want?" The question hung between them, freighted with meaning neither of them was quite ready to acknowledge. After a moment he said simply, "I want to know that you are all right. That you will be safe here. I will be fine. This is what I do, traveling from place to place, performing for strangers. I am used to being on my own." "That does not mean you should have to be." He stopped himself, looking almost surprised by his own words. "I am sorry. That was presumptuous. You are clearly a capable woman who has managed just fine without my opinion." "No, she reached out and touched his arm. "I appreciate your concern, truly. You have been kinder to me than you had any reason to be. Any decent person would have done the same. Yes, you said that already." She smiled. "But you are the one who did it. That makes you rather special, Thomas Hartley." He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw something in his expression shift, something that made her heart beat faster. But then he stepped back, putting proper distance between them. "I will be back this afternoon with your trunk," he said. "In the meantime, you should rest." After he left, Delilah went into her hotel room and sat heavily on the bed. Her body ached, her head throbbed, and exhaustion pulled at her like a physical weight. But beneath all of that, she felt something else, something she could not quite name. An awareness, a curiosity, a pull toward the quiet cowboy who had saved her life. She had known many men during her years performing. Theater managers and impresarios, fellow performers, wealthy patrons who tried to buy her company with expensive dinners and gifts. Some had been charming, others persistent, a few genuinely kind. But none of them had affected her the way Thomas did. There was something about his calm competence, his gentle strength, the way he looked at her as though she were a real person rather than an ornament or a prize. "Stop it," she told herself firmly. "You are here to perform, to earn money, to build your career. You cannot afford romantic entanglements, especially not with a cattleman in a remote corner of Washington Territory. Your life is in the East, on stages in Boston and Philadelphia and New York. This is just a detour, a temporary stop on your journey." But even as she thought it, she knew something had changed. The accident, the brush with death, Thomas pulling her from the wreckage, it had shaken something loose inside her, some wall she had built to keep herself focused and moving forward. For the first time in years, she found herself wondering if there might be more to life than the next performance, the next town, the next stage. She lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, and allowed herself to imagine what it might be like to stay in one place, to build a life rather than just a career. To have someone waiting for her at the end of the day, someone who saw her not as Delilah Winters the opera singer, but simply as Delilah. Someone with gentle hands and amber eyes and a slow drawl that made her name sound like music. Sleep claimed her again, and this time her dreams were gentler, full of sunlight and open spaces and a voice calling her home. She woke in late afternoon to a knock at the door. When she opened it, she found Thomas standing in the hallway with her trunk balanced on one shoulder. "Pete and Charlie got back an hour ago," he said. "Your trunk survived the crash pretty well. Some damage to the lock, but everything inside looks intact." He brought it in and set it down near the wardrobe. Delilah opened it eagerly and found that he was right. Her costumes were rumpled but undamaged, her sheet music intact if slightly dusty. She pulled out a gown, shaking it out to assess the wrinkles. "I can have the hotel send someone to press these," she said, more to herself than to him. "Delilah." His voice was quiet. "I need to tell you something." She looked up and saw that his expression was troubled. Fear shot through her. "What is it? What is wrong?" Pete found something when he was examining the wreckage. The wheel that broke, it did not just wear out. Someone had sawed partway through the hub, just enough to weaken it. The crash was not an accident. The world seemed to tilt around her. "Someone tried to kill us. But why, who would, I do not know. But the sheriff needs to be told, and you need to be careful. If someone wanted you dead, they might try again." "Me?" She shook her head in disbelief. "I am nobody, just a singer. Why would anyone want to hurt me?" "I do not know," he repeated. "But until we figure it out, you should not be alone. I am going to talk to the sheriff now, and then I am going to come back here and stand watch outside your door tonight." "That is ridiculous. You have a ranch to run, animals to tend. You cannot spend all night guarding a hotel room. Pete and Charlie can handle the ranch for a few days." His jaw was set in a stubborn line. "I am not arguing about this, Delilah. You are in danger, and I am not leaving you unprotected." She wanted to protest further, but the fear in her gut made the words stick in her throat. Someone had tried to kill her. Mrs. Henderson and the driver had died because someone had sabotaged the stagecoach. It seemed impossible, like something from a dime novel rather than real life. But the evidence was there, and Thomas's concern was genuine. "All right," she said quietly. "Thank you." He left to inform the sheriff, and Delilah sank down onto the bed, her mind racing. Who could possibly want her dead? She had no enemies that she knew of, no spurned lovers or jealous rivals who would go to such extremes. Her life was public but not controversial. She sang, she accepted her applause, she moved on to the next town. Nothing she did could inspire the kind of hatred that would lead to murder. Unless it was not about her specifically. Unless she had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. But that made even less sense. Why sabotage a random stagecoach? What could anyone possibly gain? Thomas returned an hour later, his expression grim. "The sheriff is looking into it. He is going to telegraph the stage line, see if they have had any other incidents. He is also going to check around town, see if anyone saw anything suspicious near the stage depot before the coach left." "You think he will find anything?" "I do not know. But at least he is taking it seriously." He studied her face, noting the fear she could not quite hide. "Are you hungry? We could get dinner in the hotel restaurant, somewhere public where you would be safe." She realized she was hungry despite her fear. "That sounds good." The hotel restaurant was full of diners, the atmosphere convivial and loud. Thomas secured them a table in the corner where he could watch the door, and they ordered the special, which turned out to be roast chicken with potatoes and vegetables. As they ate, Delilah found herself studying him again, memorizing the details of his face. "Tell me about your ranch," she said, wanting to think about anything other than sabotaged stagecoaches and potential murderers. "What is it like living out there?" His face softened as he talked about his land, the cattle he was building into a respectable herd, the horses he trained and sold. He spoke about the changing seasons, the harsh winters and golden summers, the satisfaction of building something lasting with his own hands. As he talked, Delilah found herself captivated not just by what he said but by how he said it. There was a poetry in his plain speech, a love for the land that came through in every word. "It sounds lonely," she said when he paused. "Sometimes it is," he admitted. "But I prefer honest loneliness to false companionship. I lived too many years surrounded by people but feeling utterly alone. At least on the ranch, I know what to expect. The war, and what came after. Trying to rebuild in Tennessee with nothing left to build on, watching carpetbaggers grow rich while families who had lost everything struggled to survive." His voice carried old bitterness. "Coming west was the best decision I ever made. Out here, a man's past does not matter as much as what he can do today." "I understand that," Delilah said. "In a way, that is what performing gives me. On stage, I can be anyone, transcend my circumstances, my limitations. For a few hours, I am not just Delilah Winters from Philadelphia. I am Violetta or Mimi or Carmen. I am extraordinary. You are extraordinary without the stage." He said it simply, as though stating a fact. She felt heat rise in her cheeks. "You barely know me. I know that you survived a terrible accident with grace and courage. I know that your first thought when you woke up was for Mrs. Henderson, not yourself. I know that you have built a life doing something you love, which takes more strength than most people ever manage." He met her eyes across the table. "That seems pretty extraordinary to me." No one had ever spoken to her like that before. Men had called her beautiful, talented, enchanting, but no one had seen past the performer to the person beneath. No one had recognized the strength it took to live the life she had chosen, the loneliness and uncertainty that came with constant travel, the courage required to stand alone on a stage before hundreds of critical eyes. "Thomas," she began, but he shook his head. "I am sorry. I should not have said that. You have enough to worry about without me adding complications." "What if I do not see it as a complication?" The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Thomas's expression was equal parts hope and wariness. "Delilah, you are leaving in a few weeks, moving on to your next engagement. I am rooted here, tied to my land and my stock. Even if we both wanted," he stopped himself. "There is no future in it, perhaps not, but there is a present." She reached across the table and took his hand, feeling the calluses rough against her palm. "I do not know what will happen tomorrow or next week or next month, but I know that you make me feel safe in a way I have never felt before. I know that when I look at you, I see someone I want to know better. Is that not worth something?" He turned his hand over, lacing his fingers through hers. "It is worth everything. That is what scares me." They finished their meal holding hands across the table, speaking of inconsequential things, but communicating something far deeper beneath the surface words. When they returned to her room, Thomas took up position in a chair outside her door, insisting that he would remain there through the night. "This is absurd," Delilah said from the doorway. "You will be exhausted tomorrow." "I have gone without sleep before. I will manage. At least come inside. You can sleep in the chair by the window and I will bar the door. That way you will be more comfortable and still keep me safe." He hesitated, clearly torn between propriety and practicality. Finally, practicality won. He brought his chair inside, positioned it where he could see both the door and the window, and settled in with his rifle across his lap. Delilah changed into her nightgown behind the privacy screen and climbed into bed, acutely aware of his presence in the room. She had never spent a night in the same room with a man before, not like this. It should have felt scandalous or frightening, but instead it felt natural, right? "Thomas," she said softly into the darkness. "Yes. Will you sing something? You said you play guitar. Do you sing? Some, nothing fancy like you." I do not want fancy right now, I just want to hear your voice." She heard him shift in the chair. Then his voice rose soft and low, singing an old ballad about a soldier far from home. His voice was untrained but true, a warm baritone that wrapped around her like a blanket. As he sang, she felt the fear and tension of the day drain away, replaced by a profound sense of peace. When the song ended, she said, "That was beautiful, thank you. You are welcome. Now sleep, Delilah, I will be right here." She drifted off to the sound of his breathing, steady and reassuring in the darkness, and slept more deeply than she had in months. Morning brought new challenges. Mr. Blackwell arrived early, full of plans and demands for rehearsals. The theater musicians needed to practice with her. The lighting had to be adjusted, the acoustics tested. Delilah threw herself into the work, grateful for the distraction from her fear and confusion. Thomas accompanied her to the theater and stayed throughout the rehearsal, positioned at the back of the house where he could watch everyone who entered. His presence was both comforting and distracting. She found herself glancing toward him between songs, seeking his eyes in the darkness. When she sang for him. An aria from La Traviata, the courtesan's lament about lost love and impossible dreams. Her voice soared through the theater, filling every corner with sound, and when she finished, the silence was profound. Then the musicians broke into applause, and Mr. Blackwell was on his feet, shouting "Brava!" But it was Thomas's reaction she cared about. She saw him standing now, saw something like wonder on his face, and felt her heart swell with an emotion she was not quite ready to name. After rehearsal, Thomas walked her back to the hotel. "You have an extraordinary gift," he said. "I have never heard anything like that before. Did you enjoy it?" Enjoy seems too small a word. It was like watching magic, the way you controlled the sound, the emotion you put into every note. He shook his head. "I understand now why people travel miles to hear you sing. You are not just a performer. You are an artist." His praise meant more than any review in any newspaper, more than the applause of thousands. She squeezed his arm. "It means so much to hear you say that." At the hotel, they found the sheriff waiting for them in the lobby. His expression was troubled. "Miss Winters, Mr. Hartley, I need to speak with you both." They followed him to a private parlor where he closed the door firmly. "I have been making inquiries about the Stagecoach sabotage," he said without preamble, "and I have discovered some troubling information." "What is it?" Thomas asked. "It seems that someone in town has been asking questions about Miss Winters, wanting to know her schedule, where she was staying, when she would arrive. The man who runs the telegraph office remembered because the person asking seemed so insistent." Delilah felt cold fear grip her stomach. "Did he describe this person?" "Said it was a man, well-dressed, spoke with an Eastern accent. The telegrapher assumed he was some kind of manager or associate of yours." "I do not have a manager. I book my own engagements through letters and telegrams with the theater owners." The sheriff nodded grimly. "That is what I thought, which means someone is tracking you, someone who wanted to harm you enough to sabotage a stagecoach. But why?" Delilah's voice came out higher than she intended. "I do not understand any of this. What could I have possibly done to make someone hate me that much?" "Have you rejected anyone recently? A suitor, perhaps, or a patron who wanted more than your singing?" She thought hard, trying to remember. There had been men, of course, men who sent flowers and gifts, who waited at stage doors hoping for a smile or a word. But none who had seemed dangerous or obsessive. "There was a man in Denver," she said slowly. "A mine owner named Crawford. He invited me to dinner several times and I declined. He was persistent but not threatening. I cannot imagine he would travel all this way or go to such extremes. Nevertheless, I will telegraph the Denver authorities, see what they can tell me about him." The sheriff stood. "In the meantime, I want you to be very careful. Do not go anywhere alone and vary your routine. If this person is watching you, we do not want to make it easy for him." After the sheriff left, Thomas turned to her with determination etched on his face. "You are moving out to the ranch." "I cannot do that. I have performances, and I will bring you in for everyone and stay by your side throughout. But I am not leaving you alone in this hotel where anyone can get to you. The ranch is isolated and defensible. Pete and Charlie can help keep watch. It is the safest place for you right now." "Thomas, people will talk. It is not proper for me to stay at your ranch unchaperoned." "I do not give a damn about proper right now. I care about keeping you alive." His voice was fierce, his eyes blazing. "Let people talk. Your life is worth more than your reputation." She knew he was right, but the thought of what such an arrangement would mean, the intimacy of sharing his home, terrified her almost as much as the threat against her life. Not because she did not trust him, but because she was beginning to realize how much she wanted to stay, how much she wanted to build something real with this man she had known for barely 3 days. "All right," she said quietly. "I will come to the ranch." They collected her things and her trunk, paid her hotel bill, and rode out of town in Thomas's wagon, her trunk secured in the back. As Walla Walla receded behind them, Delilah felt both relief and apprehension. She was leaving safety and civilization, heading into the wild country with a man she barely knew, because of a threat she could not understand from an enemy she could not identify. But when Thomas reached over and took her hand, squeezing gently, she felt her fear recede. Whatever was coming, whatever danger lurked ahead, she would not face it alone. The ranch looked different in full daylight, less forbidding and more welcoming. Pete and Charlie met them in the yard, both men's faces grave when Thomas explained the situation. "We will keep watch," Pete promised. "Nobody will get near the house without us knowing." Thomas showed Delilah to his room again, and this time she did not protest. He would sleep in the barn with the hands, and she would have the house to herself at night. During the day, one of them would always be nearby. That first day passed quietly. Delilah rested, her body still recovering from the accident. She sat on the porch and watched Thomas work with a young horse in the corral, his movements patient and sure as he taught the animal to accept a saddle. There was something mesmerizing about watching him, the easy confidence in his body, the gentleness in his hands. When evening came, he cooked dinner for them both, a simple meal of beans and cornbread that tasted better than the fancy fare at the hotel. They ate on the porch, watching the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold behind the distant mountains. "I could get used to this," Delilah said softly. "The quiet, the space, the beauty. It is so different from my life." "Tell me about your life," Thomas said. "The parts that are not about performing." So she did. She told him about years of constant travel, living out of trunks in hotels and boarding houses, eating meals alone in strange towns. She told him about the loneliness of her profession, the way friendships were shallow and fleeting because everyone was always moving on. She told him about her father, who had died 2 years earlier, and how his death had left her truly alone in the world. "I have spent so much of my life running towards something," she said. "Building my career, chasing success. But lately I have started to wonder if I am also running away. From commitment, from connection, from the vulnerability that comes with staying in one place and letting people really know you." "And what do you want now?" Thomas asked. She looked at him, at his face turned toward her in the fading light, and felt something unlock inside her chest. "I want to stop running." He stood and came to her, taking her hands and pulling her gently to her feet. For a long moment they simply stood there, hands clasped, looking into each other's eyes. Then slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he lowered his head and kissed her. It was gentle, tentative, a question more than a claim. His lips were warm and soft against hers, tasting of coffee and something sweet. Delilah made a small sound and leaned into him, her hands coming up to rest on his chest, feeling his heart beating fast beneath her palms. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that since I first saw you in that wrecked stagecoach, all fierce and brave despite everything. I have wanted you to," she smiled, "though I was too afraid to admit it even to myself." "Are you afraid now?" She considered the question honestly. "Yes, but not of you. I am afraid of how much I feel, how fast this is happening. I'm afraid of what it will mean for my career, my plans. But most of all, I am afraid of losing this before I have a chance to really understand what it is. Then let us not worry about later. Let us just be here now in this moment." They kissed again, longer this time, deeper, and Delilah felt the world narrow down to just the two of them, the taste of him, the feel of his arms around her, the pounding of her heart against her ribs. When they finally drew apart, both breathing hard, Thomas stepped back. "I should go to the barn," he said, his voice rough, "before I forget to be a gentleman." She did not want him to go, but she understood. There were boundaries that should not be crossed, not yet, not when everything was still so new and uncertain. So she let him go, watching as he walked across the yard to the barn, and then she went inside to the lonely bed that smelled of him. The next morning, Thomas drove her into town for her first performance. Delilah had expected to feel nervous, but instead she felt calm, centered in a way she rarely did before a show. Perhaps it was because Thomas would be there, watching from the audience. Perhaps it was because, for the first time in years, singing felt like sharing something precious rather than proving something necessary. The opera house was packed, every seat filled, people standing in the back and along the sides. The audience was a mixture of well-dressed townspeople and rough miners and cattlemen, all of them hushed with anticipation. Delilah stood backstage in her costume, a deep blue gown that had survived the crash with only minor damage, and took a deep breath. Mr. Blackwell bustled over. "Are you ready, Miss Winters? They are eager out there, very eager." "I am ready." The curtain rose, and she walked onto the stage to thunderous applause. The lights made it hard to see individual faces in the audience, but she knew Thomas was out there somewhere. She had asked him to sit in the center, about halfway back, and she directed her gaze to that spot as she began to sing. The program included arias from several operas, pieces she had performed hundreds of times, but tonight they felt new. She sang of love and loss, of longing and hope, and every word, every note, was infused with her newfound feelings for Thomas. The audience was rapt, silent except for the occasional gasp or sigh. When she finished her first set and the curtain fell for intermission, the applause was deafening. Backstage, Mr. Blackwell was beside himself with joy. "Magnificent. Absolutely magnificent. I have never heard you sing better, Miss Winters." She barely heard him. All she could think about was getting through the second half so she could see Thomas, to know what he had thought, to see his face. The second half went even better than the first. She ended with Caro Nome from Rigolto, a demanding piece that required her to sustain impossibly high notes while conveying the character's innocent joy. As she sang the final, soaring phrase, she spotted Thomas in the audience, standing now, his face turned up toward her, and she sang those last notes just for him. The audience erupted. They stood and cheered, calling for encores, throwing flowers onto the stage. Delilah took her bows, but her eyes kept returning to Thomas, to the expression of wonder and pride on his face. When the curtain finally fell for the last time, she rushed offstage and found him waiting in the wings, having somehow made his way backstage through the crowd. "You were incredible," he said, and then he was kissing her, right there in front of Mr. Blackwell and the musicians and the stagehands, kissing her like she was air and he had been drowning. When they broke apart, she was laughing and crying at the same time. "Did you like it? Really?" "Like is far too small a word. Delilah, you are magic, pure magic." They drove back to the ranch in the wagon, sitting close together on the seat, her hand in his. Delilah felt lighter than she had in years, as though some weight she had been carrying had finally been lifted. Over the next week, a pattern developed. Thomas would drive her into town in the afternoon for rehearsal and preparation. She would perform in the evening, singing to packed houses, her voice seeming to gain power and richness with each show. After the performance, they would return to the ranch, often arriving long after midnight, and sit on the porch talking until exhaustion finally drove them to their separate beds. During the days at the ranch, Delilah found herself helping with small tasks, feeding chickens, gathering eggs, even learning to milk the cow under Pete's patient instruction. She had never done such work before, but she found it satisfying in a way that surprised her. There was something grounding about physical labor, about working with her hands to create something tangible. Thomas taught her to ride properly, not just sitting on a horse while someone else controlled it, but actually riding, learning to communicate with the animal through subtle shifts of weight and pressure. She fell off twice, but each time he was there to help her up, to encourage her to try again. When she finally managed to canter across the pasture without losing her seat, his whoop of celebration made her laugh with delight. They talked about everything. His childhood in Tennessee, her years of training, his experiences in the war, her struggles to be taken seriously as a female performer. They debated literature and music, politics and philosophy. They discovered a shared love of poetry and spent one entire afternoon reading Whitman aloud to each other on the porch. But beneath all the conversation and companionship, there was a growing tension, a awareness of boundaries not yet crossed. Every accidental touch felt electric. Every good night at the bedroom door required more willpower to walk away. They both knew where this was heading, but neither wanted to rush, to cheapen what was developing between them with premature action. The threat that had brought them together seemed to recede into the background. The sheriff had no luck tracking down the mysterious questioner, and no further incidents occurred. Pete and Charlie maintained their watch, but as days passed without incident, even they began to relax. It was during her second week at the ranch, on a morning when Thomas had taken her riding to see a distant part of his property, that everything changed. They had stopped by a creek to let the horses drink, and Delilah was standing on the bank, watching the water flow over smooth stones when Thomas came up behind her. "Delilah." His voice was serious. "We need to talk." She turned to face him, suddenly afraid. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong." "Everything is right, that is the problem." He took her hands. "I am in love with you. I know it is too soon. I know you are leaving in a few weeks. I know all the reasons this is impossible. But I cannot keep pretending I do not feel what I feel." Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. "Thomas, you do not have to say anything. I just needed you to know. Whatever happens, wherever you go, you should know that you have completely captured my heart. I love you too." The words burst out of her, too long held back. "I love you so much it terrifies me. I have spent my whole adult life building towards something, working for something, and now all I can think about is staying here with you, building a life here." "Then stay." He pulled her close. "Stay with me, make this your home." My career, you could still perform. There are theaters in Walla Walla and Pendleton, in Portland and Seattle. You would not have to give up singing, just the constant travel, the loneliness. It was tempting, so tempting. But doubt crept in. What if you grow tired of me? What if this is just a dream that falls apart in the reality of daily life? Then we will deal with it together. But I do not believe that will happen. Delilah, you are not just a dream to me. You are real and complicated and sometimes difficult, and I love every part of you. The performer and the woman, the strength and the vulnerability, all of it. She reached up and cupped his face in her hands. I want to stay. I am so afraid, but I want to stay. Then stay. Marry me, Delilah. Be my wife. Let me spend the rest of my life trying to deserve you. You already deserve me. She kissed him, pouring all her love and fear and hope into it. Yes, yes, I will marry you. They made love there by the creek, on Thomas's coat spread over the soft grass, with the sound of water and birdsong around them. It was Delilah's first time, and Thomas was patient and gentle, taking his time, making sure she felt pleasure as well as pain. When it was over, they lay tangled together, her head on his chest, his fingers trailing through her hair. You are my most beautiful song, she whispered. The melody I did not know I had been searching for. He kissed the top of her head. And you are my home, the place I have been trying to find ever since the war ended. They rode back to the ranch in the early afternoon, both of them giddy with joy and plans for the future. But as they crested the last hill before the house came into view, Thomas reined in sharply, his body tensing. What is wrong? Delilah asked. Smoke. Too much smoke for just the stove. He urged his horse forward at a gallop, and Delilah followed, her heart in her throat. As they got closer, she could see flames licking from the barn. Pete and Charlie were there with buckets, throwing water on the fire, but it was clear they were fighting a losing battle. Thomas leaped from his horse before it had fully stopped and ran to help. Delilah dismounted more carefully and looked around wildly for some way to assist. It was then that she saw him. A man standing near the house, well dressed in a suit that looked out of place in the ranch yard, watching the fire with evident satisfaction. As if sensing her gaze, he turned and looked directly at her, Miss Winters. His voice was cultured with an Eastern accent. How lovely to finally meet you in person. Who are you? She looked around for Thomas, but he was fully occupied with the fire, his back to her. What do you want? I am someone who has admired you from afar for quite some time. I have attended dozens of your performances, sent you gifts and letters. He stepped closer, and Delilah backed away instinctively. But you never acknowledged me, never even looked my way. I receive many gifts and letters. I cannot possibly respond to them all. You could have responded to mine. I am Harrison Crawford. Does that name mean nothing to you, the mine owner from Denver, the one who had been so persistent? Mr. Crawford, I remember you. I explained that I could not accept your dinner invitations, that my schedule was too demanding. You rejected me. His voice turned cold. You made me look like a fool in front of my associates, so I decided that if I could not have you, no one would. Horror washed over her as she realized the extent of his obsession. You sabotaged the stagecoach. You killed Mrs. Henderson and the driver. Collateral damage. You were supposed to die, but you survived, so I followed you here, waited for my chance. And now that Cowboy you have been throwing yourself at will lose everything he values, just like you made me feel. Thomas! Delilah screamed his name, but the roar of the fire and the shouts of the men fighting it drowned her out. Crawford lunged for her, and she tried to run, but her weak ankle betrayed her. She stumbled, and he caught her arm, his grip bruising. She opened her mouth to scream again, but he clamped his other hand over her face, muffling the sound. Then suddenly he was ripped away from her, thrown backwards with such force that he sprawled in the dirt. Thomas stood between them, his face a mask of fury, his fists clenched. "You touch her again, and I will kill you where you stand." Crawford scrambled to his feet, pulling a derringer from his coat pocket. "You are going to regret stealing what was mine." Everything happened very fast then. The gun went off, the crack of it sharp even over the fire's roar. Thomas jerked backwards but did not fall. Before Crawford could fire again, Pete was there, his rifle leveled at the man's chest. "Drop it," Pete commanded. "Drop it now, or I will shoot you down like the dog you are." Crawford looked around wildly, seeing Charlie approaching from the other side, also armed. Outnumbered and outgunned, he let the derringer fall to the ground. Charlie kicked it away and grabbed Crawford's arms, wrenching them behind his back. Delilah rushed to Thomas, her hands frantically searching for injury. "Are you hit? Did he shoot you?" "Grazed my arm, nothing serious." But there was blood seeping through his sleeve, more than a graze should cause. "We need to get you to the doctor." "The fire is dying down. Pete and I got it mostly under control," Charlie said, keeping his grip firm on Crawford. "You worry about your arm." "I will worry about this piece of trash." They rode into town in the wagon, Thomas driving despite Delilah's protests, Crawford bound and gagged in the back under Pete's watchful eye. The barn had been damaged but not destroyed, and the house had been spared entirely. It could have been so much worse. In town, they went first to the doctor, who cleaned and bandaged Thomas's wound, declaring that he had been very lucky. The bullet had gouged a furrow in his upper arm but had not hit bone or any major vessels. He would heal with rest and care. Then to the sheriff's office, where Crawford was locked in a cell and his full confession extracted. He admitted to sabotaging the stagecoach, to following Delilah to Walla Walla, to setting the fire at the ranch. His obsession had twisted into murderous rage, and he showed no remorse for the lives he had taken. "He will hang for this," the sheriff said grimly. "The judge is due in town next week for the circuit. Until then, he stays locked up tight." Exhausted and shaken, Thomas and Delilah returned to the ranch as evening fell. The smell of smoke still hung in the air, but the immediate danger was past. Pete and Charlie had cleaned up most of the mess and started planning repairs to the barn. That night, Delilah insisted that Thomas stay in the house, that she would tend his wound and make sure he rested properly. There was no pretense now of separate sleeping arrangements. She helped him into bed and climbed in beside him, resting her head carefully on his uninjured shoulder. "I thought I lost you," she whispered. "When I saw him pull that gun, I thought, I know, I felt the same when I saw him grab you." His good arm tightened around her. "We are all right, Delilah. We survived. We have a future together now. Do you still want to marry me?" "Even after all this chaos I brought into your life?" He turned to face her, his expression incredulous. "You think this changes how I feel?" "Delilah, you did not bring chaos. Crawford did. You brought light and music and love into my life. You made this house into a home." "Yes, I still want to marry you more than ever." She kissed him gently, mindful of his injury. "Then let us not wait. As soon as you are healed enough, let us marry. I want to start our life together." "What about your scheduled performances? You have commitments, I will honor them. But after that, I am staying. We will figure out the rest together." They made plans in the darkness, their voices soft with hope and love. Delilah would complete her engagement at the Walla Walla Opera House, which had 3 more scheduled performances. After that, she would send letters to the theaters where she had bookings, explaining that she was retiring from touring. She would continue to perform locally, but her days of constant travel were over. Thomas would rebuild the damaged barn, expand the house to include a music room where she could practice, and give private lessons. They would marry quietly, just the two of them with Pete and Charlie as witnesses, and then have a larger celebration later when Thomas's family could travel from Tennessee. Over the next 2 weeks, as Thomas healed and the ranch slowly recovered from the fire, they put their plans into action. Delilah's final performances in Walla Walla were bittersweet, each one a goodbye to her old life and a hello to her new one. The audiences gave her standing ovations, and Mr. Blackwell begged her to reconsider, to do just one more tour, but she was firm. Her touring days were over. She would perform locally when opportunities arose, but her home was here now with Thomas. Crawford was tried and convicted quickly, the evidence against him overwhelming. He was sentenced to hang, though the execution would not occur for several months pending appeals. Delilah testified at the trial, her voice steady as she described his obsession and the attack. She felt no satisfaction in his conviction, only a deep sadness at the waste of it all. Mrs. Henderson and the driver had died because one man could not accept rejection. It seemed a terrible price. Thomas and Delilah were married on a crisp October morning in 1882, in the small church in Walla Walla. Delilah wore a simple dress of cream-colored silk, and Thomas wore his best suit, his arm still in a sling but healing well. Pete and Charlie stood as witnesses, both men grinning broadly. The ceremony was short and sweet, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Thomas kissed her with such tenderness that Delilah felt tears slip down her cheeks. They held a reception at the ranch, inviting all the neighbors and friends they had made. Someone brought a fiddle, someone else a banjo, and dancing went on until late into the night. Delilah sang for her guests, not opera but simple folk songs that everyone knew, her voice weaving through the crisp autumn air. When everyone had finally gone home and they were alone in their house, Thomas carried her over the threshold, his arm healed enough now to bear her weight. They made love slowly, tenderly, taking their time to explore and pleasure each other. Afterwards, lying tangled together in the darkness, Delilah felt a sense of peace and rightness that she had never experienced before. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," he replied. "My beautiful song." The first year of their marriage was not without challenges. The ranch work was hard, and Delilah had to learn skills she had never imagined needing. But she was a quick study, and Thomas was an endlessly patient teacher. She learned to cook and preserve food, to manage a household budget, to help with calving and branding. Her hands, once kept soft and smooth for appearances, became calloused and strong. She did continue to sing, giving concerts in Walla Walla and occasionally in larger towns like Portland and Seattle. But these were trips of a few days at most, and Thomas often accompanied her. It was different than touring had been, less lonely, more fulfilling. She sang not because she had to prove herself, but because music was part of who she was. Thomas's mother and sisters came to visit the following summer, traveling all the way from Tennessee. Delilah was nervous about meeting them, worried they would disapprove of their brother marrying a performer, but her fears proved groundless. They welcomed her warmly, and Thomas's mother clasped her hands and said, "I can see why my son loves you. You have brought him back to life." In the spring of 1884, Delilah discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. She had never imagined herself as a mother, had built her life around a career that left no room for children. But now, feeling the child growing inside her, she could not imagine any other path. Thomas was overjoyed, instantly becoming protective and hovering. He insisted she rest, that she not overwork herself, that she let him handle all the heavy lifting. It drove her slightly mad, but she also found it endearing. This man, who had survived war and loss and built a life from nothing, was undone by the thought of something happening to her or their baby. She continued to perform through her pregnancy, adjusting her costumes to accommodate her changing shape, until the 8th month when traveling became too uncomfortable. Their son was born on a stormy November night, delivered by Dr. Morrison, with Thomas holding her hand and Pete and Charlie pacing anxiously on the porch. The birth was long and difficult, but when Delilah finally heard her baby's first cry, every moment of pain was forgotten. They named him William Thomas Hartley, William for Thomas's father who had died at Shiloh, and called him Will. He was a healthy, lusty baby with his father's eyes and his mother's dark hair. Thomas was besotted, spending hours just staring at his son, marveling at the tiny fingers and toes. As Delilah recovered from the birth, she found herself thinking about Mrs. Henderson, the woman who had died in the stagecoach crash. She had been traveling to see her daughter, Thomas had said. She had died because of Crawford's obsession, never getting to share whatever news or visit she had planned. The tragedy of it weighed on Delilah, and she made Thomas promise to help her locate Mrs. Henderson's daughter in Portland. They found her through the sheriff's records, and Delilah wrote a long letter explaining what had happened, how her mother had died, how she had not been alone at the end even though Delilah had not known her well. She sent a photograph of Will, telling the daughter that she was naming her next child, if she had a daughter, after Mrs. Henderson. It was a small gesture, but it felt important, a way of honoring the woman's memory. The response came months later, a tear-stained letter thanking Delilah for her kindness and expressing gratitude that her mother's last days had been spent with someone who cared enough to remember her. The correspondence continued over the years, and eventually the daughter, Martha, came to visit the ranch. She and Delilah became friends, bonded by the tragedy that had touched both their lives. As Will grew from an infant to a toddler, Delilah gradually returned to performing. She gave concerts in Walla Walla, drawing audiences from throughout the region. She also began teaching voice, taking on a few select students who showed real promise. The music room Thomas had built became the center of her working life, filled with the sounds of scales and arias, of young voices learning to soar. In 1886, they had a daughter, whom they named Catherine Henderson Hartley, honoring Mrs. Henderson as Delilah had promised. Catherine was quieter than Will had been, a thoughtful baby who watched everything with serious dark eyes. Thomas joked that they had produced a future philosopher. The ranch prospered. Thomas's careful management and hard work paid off, and they were able to expand their herd and purchase additional land. Pete and Charlie remained loyal employees and dear friends, both men eventually marrying local women and starting families of their own on small parcels. Thomas helped them purchase. Delilah never regretted her decision to leave touring behind. She had found something richer than any stage could offer: a home, a family, a community. She still loved music, still felt that thrill when her voice hit a particularly difficult note or when a student finally mastered a challenging piece. But it was no longer the only thing that defined her. She was Thomas's wife, Will and Catherine's mother, a rancher and a teacher and a member of the Walla Walla community. She helped found a local theater company, volunteered at the church, supported other women who were trying to build independent lives. She had not given up her identity, she had expanded it. Thomas, for his part, never ceased to marvel at his good fortune. Sometimes he would stop in the middle of his work and just listen to Delilah singing in the house, her voice floating over the ranch, and feel overwhelmed with gratitude. He had saved her life that day in the ravine, but in truth, she had saved his. She had given him a reason to open his heart again, to believe in the possibility of happiness after so much loss. As the years passed, they faced the usual challenges of ranch life: harsh winters and dry summers, cattle lost to disease or predators, the constant struggle to make ends meet. But they faced it all together, supporting each other through difficulties, celebrating victories large and small. Will grew into a sturdy boy who loved the ranch life, trailing after his father and learning everything about cattle and horses. Catherine proved to have her mother's musical gift, her clear soprano voice turning heads in church from the time she was 5 years old. Delilah began training her daughter formally when she turned 8, passing on the techniques and skills she had learned. In 1889, they had a third child, another son they named Peter Charles Hartley after Pete and Charlie, both men weeping openly at the honor. Peter was a laughing, energetic baby who kept the whole household on their toes. Washington achieved statehood in 1889, and the territory that had been their home became part of the Union. Walla Walla continued to grow and thrive, becoming a center of agriculture and commerce. The Opera House remained a fixture of cultural life, and Delilah performed there regularly, her voice still strong and true even as she approached middle age. For their 10th wedding anniversary in 1892, Thomas surprised Delilah with a trip to San Francisco. They left the children with Pete's wife and spent 2 weeks in the city, attending the opera, eating in fine restaurants, walking along the waterfront. Delilah had not been to a major city in years, and she found herself both dazzled and oddly uncomfortable. The noise, the crowds, the constant rushing, it all felt overwhelming after the peace of ranch life. One evening, they attended a performance at the Grand Opera House, watching a famous soprano perform Violetta in La Traviata. Delilah had sung that role dozens of times, and she found herself critiquing the performance, noting where the singer's breath control could be better, where she pushed too hard for emotion. "You miss it?" Thomas asked as they walked back to their hotel afterward. The grand stages, the acclaim, the excitement, Delilah considered the question carefully. "There is a part of me that will always be a performer, that will always love the feeling of singing for an audience. But miss it? No, I have something better now." "What is that?" "I have a life that feels real. When I was touring, I was always in motion, always chasing the next performance, the next town. I never felt rooted anywhere. But with you, with our children, with the ranch, I feel like I have found my place. I belong somewhere to someone. That is worth more than any amount of applause." He pulled her close and kissed her temple. "You have no idea how much it means to hear you say that. Sometimes I worry that you regret giving up your career for me." "I did not give it up for you. I gave it up for us, for the life we could build together. There is a difference." She squeezed his hand. "And I would make the same choice again in a heartbeat." They returned to the ranch refreshed and renewed, throwing themselves back into the work and the life they had built. The children were growing fast, each of them developing their own personalities and interests. Will talked constantly of expanding the ranch, of trying new breeding techniques he had read about. Catherine split her time between practicing her singing and sketching everything she saw, showing talent in both areas. Peter, still young, seemed most interested in taking things apart to see how they worked, much to his parents' alternating amusement and exasperation. In 1895, Thomas's mother passed away peacefully in Tennessee. Thomas made the long journey back for the funeral, taking Will with him to meet the family and see where his father had grown up. They were gone for nearly a month, and Delilah missed Thomas with an intensity that surprised her. They had been married for 13 years, yet her love for him had not diminished. If anything, it had grown stronger, deepened by shared experiences and the life they had built. When he returned, She flew into his arms like a young bride, much to the amusement of their children. "I missed you," she said simply, "and I missed you, every single day." He kissed her thoroughly, ignoring Will's good-natured groans of embarrassment. That evening, after the children were in bed, they sat on the porch as they had so many times over the years, watching the stars come out over the hills. Thomas took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "Being back in Tennessee made me think about how far I have come," he said quietly. "When I left after the war, I was running away from pain and loss. I thought I was just looking for a fresh start, a place to build something, but what I really found was you. You are the reason all of this means something." "You are my home," Delilah replied, "my most beautiful song. Not because of your voice, though I love to hear you sing, but because everything about you, about us, about the life we have created together, it is music. It is the melody I did not even know I was searching for, and now I cannot imagine my life without it." He kissed her again, long and slow, and she thought about that day so many years ago when he had pulled her from the wrecked stagecoach. She had been running then, chasing a career, avoiding connection. And he had been the one who made her stop, who gave her a reason to stay, who showed her that the greatest performance of her life would not be on any stage but in the daily acts of love and partnership that made up a marriage. As the years continued to pass, Delilah and Thomas settled into the comfortable rhythms of long marriage. They still made each other laugh, still found reasons to steal kisses when the children were not looking, still talked late into the night about their dreams and fears. They argued sometimes, as all couples do, but they had learned to fight fair, to listen as well as speak, to remember that they were on the same team. Will fell in love at 18 with a local girl named Sarah, and they married the following year, building a house on the far corner of the ranch. Their first grandchild, a sturdy boy named Thomas James, arrived in 1897, and Delilah discovered that being a grandmother was even more wonderful than she had imagined. She could spoil the child and then hand him back to his parents, enjoying all the sweetness with none of the sleepless nights. Catherine, after much deliberation, decided to pursue her music seriously. At 17, she traveled to San Francisco to audition for a prestigious music academy and was accepted with a full scholarship. Delilah had mixed feelings about her daughter following in her footsteps, knowing both the joys and the hardships of a performer's life. But Thomas reminded her that Catherine was her own person, entitled to make her own choices, and that they had raised her to be strong and independent. So they sent their daughter off to California with love and encouragement, and tried not to worry too much when her letters spoke of the intensity of her training, the competitiveness of the other students, the homesickness that sometimes overwhelmed her. Catherine came home for summers, and each time she seemed more polished, more professional, more like the singer Delilah had once been. Peter, now a teenager, had announced his intention to become an engineer, fascinated by the new technologies that were beginning to transform the American West. Telephones and electric lights were reaching even remote places like Walla Walla, and Peter wanted to be part of that progress. Thomas and Delilah supported his ambitions, though they hoped he would not move too far away. In 1900, as the new century dawned, Delilah and Thomas celebrated their 18th wedding anniversary. They threw a party at the ranch, inviting everyone who had been part of their life together. Pete and Charlie and their families, neighbors and friends from town, Delilah's students past and present, Thomas's business associates. It was a warm summer evening, and they set up tables in the yard, stringing lanterns from the trees. After dinner, people started calling for Delilah to sing. She tried to protest, saying it was a party, not a performance, but the calls grew more insistent. Finally, Laughing, she agreed. Thomas fetched his guitar, tuning it carefully, and together they performed a duet, an old folk song about love that endures through hardship and time. Their voices blended perfectly, his warm baritone supporting her still strong soprano, years of living together making them instinctively aware of each other's rhythms and phrasing. When they finished, there was a moment of profound silence, and then the crowd erupted in applause. Delilah looked at Thomas, at the silver threading through his dark hair, at the lines that time and sun had etched around his eyes, and felt her heart swell with love. He had aged, as had she, but he was still the most beautiful sight she could imagine. That night, after everyone had gone home and the yard was cleaned up, they sat on the porch in their customary places, tired but content. "It has been a good life," Thomas said softly. "The best life," Delilah agreed. "Better than anything I could have planned or imagined." "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had not been there that day? If someone else had found the wrecked stagecoach?" "I try not to think about it. The what-ifs can drive you mad." She reached for his hand. "I prefer to focus on what did happen. You saved my life, and then you gave me a reason to live it fully. You did the same for me. I was just existing before you came along, going through the motions. You made everything mean something again." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds, the crickets and the distant call of an owl. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and joys, as every day did, but they would face it together, as they had faced everything for the past 18 years. Catherine graduated from the Music Academy in 1902 with highest honors and immediately began booking performances throughout California and Oregon. She wrote home regularly, her letters full of excitement and exhaustion in equal measure. Delilah recognized the fever of it, the intoxicating pull of life on stage. She was happy for her daughter but also worried, knowing how lonely that life could be. Then, in 1903, Catherine's letters began to mention a pianist named James who often accompanied her performances. At first, it was just casual mentions, but gradually he took up more and more space in her letters. By summer, she brought him home to meet the family, a serious young man with kind eyes who looked at Catherine like she hung the moon. They were married that fall in a ceremony at the ranch, with Catherine wearing Delilah's old wedding dress altered to fit her taller frame. As Delilah watched her daughter exchange vows, she thought about her own wedding day, about how uncertain and hopeful she had been. She said a silent prayer that Catherine and James would find even half the happiness she had found with Thomas. Will and Sarah had 2 more children by then, giving Delilah and Thomas 3 grandchildren who filled the ranch with noise and laughter. Peter had gone east to study at a technical school in Boston, his letters full of amazement at the innovations he was learning about. The house felt emptier with him gone, but Delilah took comfort in knowing that all her children were pursuing their dreams, building their own lives. In 1905, Delilah turned 45 and Thomas threw her a surprise party, gathering friends and family to celebrate. She had not performed publicly in several years, focusing instead on teaching and her family, but that evening, at Thomas's request, she sang. Her voice had changed with age, losing some of its highest range but gaining richness and depth. She sang Caro Nome again, the piece she had sung the night Thomas first heard her perform, and when she finished, there were tears on more faces than just her own. "You are still the most beautiful song I have ever heard," Thomas told her later as they prepared for bed. "The melody that made my life complete." She kissed him, tasting the salt of happy tears. "And you are mine, always and forever." The years rolled on, bringing changes both welcome and difficult. Pete passed away in 1907 after a short illness, and they buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch he had helped build. Charlie followed 2 years later, and with their passing, an era ended. The ranch hands who replaced them were good men, but they had not shared the same journey, the same struggles and triumphs. Will took over more and more of the ranch management as Thomas grew older, though Thomas still rode out most days to check on the stock and oversee the work. He moved slower now, his joints stiff from years of hard labor, but his mind was as sharp as ever. Delilah had given up performing entirely, though she still taught a few select students. Her voice, while still lovely, had lost the power and range that had once defined it. She made peace with that, knowing that everything had its season. Their grandchildren grew, and great-grandchildren began to arrive. The ranch house that had once seemed spacious now felt crowded during family gatherings. 3 generations of Hartleys filling every room with conversation and laughter. Delilah and Thomas would look at each other across the chaos and smile, both thinking the same thing. This was what they had built, this legacy of love and family. In 1915, as they approached their 33rd wedding anniversary, Thomas became ill. It started as a cough that would not go away, progressing to weakness and weight loss. Dr. Morrison, now elderly himself, diagnosed consumption and shook his head sadly. There was no cure, he said, just time and care and making the most of whatever days remained. Delilah nursed Thomas with fierce devotion, refusing to accept that he was dying. She made him special meals, sang to him when he could not sleep, sat by his bed reading aloud from his favorite books. Their children came and went, spending time with their father, saying things that needed to be said. One evening in early October, as the leaves were turning and the air held the first hint of winter, Thomas asked Delilah to help him out to the porch. She wrapped him in blankets and they sat in their old spots, watching the sun set over the hills they had ridden across together so many times. "I do not want to leave you," he said quietly. "I am not ready. I know." She held his hand, feeling how thin it had become, how fragile. "I am not ready either. You have given me the best years of my life, the best of everything. We gave them to each other." She fought back tears. "You saved me, Thomas, not just from the stagecoach, but from a life half-lived. You taught me what it meant to really love someone, to build something lasting. You were always my most beautiful song," he said, echoing the words she had spoken to him so many years ago. The melody that made everything worthwhile. He died 3 days later, peacefully in his sleep, with Delilah beside him holding his hand. She sat with him for a long time afterward, memorizing the lines of his face, the silver of his hair, the hands that had held her so many times. Then she leaned down and kissed his forehead one last time. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for everything. For saving me, for loving me, for being my home. I will carry you in my heart until we meet again." They buried him on the hill next to Pete and Charlie, overlooking the ranch he had built. The funeral was huge, people coming from all over the region to pay their respects. Everyone spoke of his integrity, his kindness, his strength of character, but Delilah barely heard any of it. She stood by the grave with her children around her, feeling hollow and lost. The months that followed were the hardest of her life. She moved through the days mechanically, going through the motions of living without really feeling alive. The ranch continued on, while managing it capably, but Delilah could not bring herself to care much about cattle or horses or crops. The house felt empty without Thomas, every room a reminder of his absence. It was Catherine who finally pulled her mother out of her grief. She came home for a long visit, bringing her own children, and gently but firmly insisted that Delilah start living again. "Papa would not want you to just fade away," she said. "He loved you too much for that. Honor his memory by living fully, by continuing to share your gifts with the world. Slowly, painfully, Delilah began to re-emerge. She started teaching again, taking on students who came from as far away as Portland to study with the legendary Delilah Winters Hartley. She reconnected with friends she had neglected during her grief. She spent time with her grandchildren, sharing stories about their grandfather, keeping his memory alive. She lived for another 12 years after Thomas's death, dying peacefully in her sleep in 1927 at the age of 67. By then, she had seen incredible changes sweep across the country. Automobiles replacing horses, electricity reaching even remote ranches, women winning the right to vote. The world she left was vastly different from the one she had entered. They buried her next to Thomas, joining them again after 12 years apart. At the funeral, Catherine sang Caro Nome, the aria her mother had performed the night her parents met, and there was not a dry eye among the mourners. The ranch stayed in the family, passed down through Will's line. The house was expanded and modernized, but the music room remained much as Delilah had left it, a shrine to her memory. Her great-great-grandchildren would play there, not knowing who she had been, just knowing that she had been important somehow. But those who knew the story, who heard the legend passed down through generations, understood. They understood that Delilah Winters had been a woman of rare courage, who had built a life of extraordinary love and purpose. They understood that Thomas Hartley had been a man of uncommon character, who had saved not just a life but created a legacy. And they understood that together, they had created something beautiful and lasting, a love story that endured long after the last notes of her songs had faded into silence. A love that had saved them both, that had given meaning to their lives, that had echoed down through the years in the family they created, and the example they set. They were, in every sense, each other's most beautiful song, the melody that transformed their lives and created harmony where before there had been only silence. And that music played on, long after they both were gone, in the lives they touched, and the love they shared and the legacy they left behind.